Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this month's Solutions of Change monthly mental health moment. This month we are joined by the wonderful Miss Tracy Cheatham, who is our lead family support specialist here, and we're going to have a conversation about emotional intelligence. So Tracy, do you know much about emotional intelligence, the subject itself?
I like to believe that I do, but I'm looking forward to potentially learning something new today and expanding my knowledge. I mean, you know me, I'm always looking to expand my knowledge.
Okay, awesome. Let's get started. So what we know is that emotional intelligence is our ability to be able to recognize, control, and effectively express our emotions. But that is kind of the common definition, but we wanted to make sense. So we'll talk about ways that you can incorporate that into kind of your daily functionality and ways that you'll see it in relationships, in your thought processes, in the way that you behave. So what do you think about our general ability to be able to accept what our emotions are, recognize them?
When you say we, do you mean just like the population
The
at
population,
large?
just from what you know of people, what do you think?
What do I think? I think that people struggle to control their emotions. I think that people, in my experience, I feel like, you know what, actually, I feel like people struggle with certain emotions. I think that, and I think that is probably like based on what they're comfortable with.
Right.
And I think that that's probably tied to emotions that were deemed as okay and not okay in those formative years. That's probably what I would say, because I wouldn't say that. I've met very few people who struggle with like emotions in a general sense, but most people struggle with anger or fear or love or joy, like navigating those particularly. Yeah.
And I think that's a good perspective, right? Because even when you say that dark side of emotions, like the anger and the fear and disappointment, some people struggle with joy. They don't know what it looks like for them, so it's difficult for them to be in a space where they have this feeling that's associated with joy, but they don't know how to express it.
Exactly.
It feels unnatural.
Absolutely.
I think that it's important that when we're talking about our emotions, that the first thing that people do is kind of self-exploration, right? Why do I feel this way? What is it that makes me feel this way? Because a lot of times we can identify that we feel anger or we feel frustration or whatever it is. But if we don't stop to ask ourselves the question, what makes me feel that way?
Right.
Then it becomes difficult for us to put that into a part of our just general functionality and how we operate throughout our days.
Absolutely. And I think, I honestly think, like I said, it ties back to what was allowed in those formative years. And I think that there's something to be said about identifying those, what I would consider to be triggers for any type of emotion, because like you said, it helps you navigate, oh, this triggered me to feel this. It's something that I want to either have less of in my life or have more of in my life. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with that.
I think the tricky part of that too is when you say have less of or have more in my life, sometimes we operate in the space of avoidance with the expectation that we can avoid those things that make us feel those ways, right? But sometimes we can't avoid it.
Relevant.
Right. So I want us to make sure that we understand that the reason that we're looking at it and making the decision about the way things make us feel is because we want to know how to manage it in those moments.
Managing, not avoiding. Yes, Tracy. That was an amen for me, because yes.
But if you think about it, right, there's, especially in relationships with ourselves, there's certain things that we can say, okay, with me, I'm going to avoid that. I'm not going to be around these certain people because I don't like the way they make me feel, or these friendships that make me feel inadequate, or, you know, like I'm stuck in a specific space. We can say that I'm going to avoid that, right? And maybe fill it with something different, new relationships, new experiences. But when it comes to things like regular relationships, like romantic relationships, family relationships, you know, some of the people that you wish you could get away from, but you actually can't. We want to make sure we know how to deal with it in the moment. So if I'm talking to someone, say a teenager, who has a parent where they clearly feel like they don't understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's common
Mm-hmm.
in teenage,
Mm-hmm.
years where you
Mm-hmm.
feel like your parents just don't understand
Yes,
you, right? There's
yes.
a whole song about it.
Yes.
And probably many.
Mhm.
But the idea is that in that space, if we're only seeing that they don't understand us, that they
Mhm.
don't identify with us,
Mhm.
then we're not recognizing what it is that's at the root of that.
Mm-hmm.
We can't have real and effective conversation and communication about it because we're stuck in the, oh, that really makes me mad, or that really pisses me off, or my parents don't understand, and I'm gonna go in my room because it's safe and quiet in there and I can be alone with my angst.
Avoiding the
avoidance.
conversation for sure. I think that as you were speaking this, and as you know, it was resonating. I think that across the board, management makes for a more fulfilling life in general. I think something about avoidance feels like it. I think for me, I'm speaking for myself, it prompts not an insecurity, but just like a deep understanding, like you haven't faced this and you're probably not as equipped for it to come back, or you're not as equipped as you could have been had you have faced it. That's something that resonated with me for sure too.
And I think that's important because as we are learning how to manage those situations, we are more able to recognize that in the future, in our next experience, in a way that says, oh, this is familiar to me. I know that this bothers me because. So I like to use the example of traffic because I think it's funny, but it's not. I am normally like a calm and middle of the road person.
God bless you.
I'm accepting, and I feel like I'm flexible and open, right? But there's something about traffic that gets me into that space of extra occasionally. So in my mind, I recognize that it's bothersome to me. And you'll see people who get upset in traffic and blow their horn and cuss people out and flip them off and do all of those things. But the question is, what does it really resolve? If you don't stop to think, I'm frustrated and upset because that person cut me off, or they sped by me, they did something dangerous. And then the second part of that thought is because it puts my life in danger.
That
And
fear.
That fear, right?
Yeah.
That fear, and then couple that with if you have people who depend on you or relationships and families, there's that fear of what if something would have happened to me in traffic. So now I know that I'm angry based on the way this person behaved in traffic, but I have a different perspective of it that keeps me from putting myself into a position where I'm getting out of the car and trying to beat somebody up in traffic. Because I know that it's connected to those other things, and those other things are more important to me than being the person that's right in traffic. Being safe, so I can get home to those people who depend on me or and that I care about.
Getting to the bottom line.
Getting to the
what
bottom
is the
line.
bottom line of this emotion? I'm afraid that I will not be able to support my family or maintain my responsibilities if I was damaged. Then I'm not going to continue to further put myself in harm's way because it's pulling me away from my goal. I definitely hear that for sure.
The more and more that we do that, the more we learn how to control our emotions, that piece of control that we're talking about. So we know how to recognize them, right? We get the idea of basic emotions and how to be able to connect those to the way that we feel in those moments, right? I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm joyous, I'm content, things like that. But then when we get into that piece that says control, control is hard. But if we start to think about that secondary thought, the reason that we feel that way, then we can start to kind of control ourselves in those moments. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to be perfect.
Oh, yes. Or easy to begin with.
Or easy.
It's a skill that you have to grow for sure.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, I agree. A skill that you have to grow, and knowing the purpose that you're growing that skill for better relationships, better understanding of yourself, better understanding of what it is that you're trying to be in your life and where you're trying to go. If you want all of your relationships to be good, it's kind of an ideal thing, right? It's ideal, you would be happy if everything worked the way that you wanted it to work.
Right.
But unfortunately, as human beings, we understand that that's not always the case.
At all.
So the question becomes, what can I do to better show up as the person that I'm trying to be? How can I better control my emotions in these situations and experiences that I'm having to not allow it to control me?
I think in the wellness space, we call that growing the gap. The gap between stimulant and response. So, my background is in wellness, meditation, and yoga. And in meditation, when you sit there, there's so many, even though you're just sitting in one space, there's so many things that you're being bombarded with that tickle on your skin, that to-do list in your mind, that your foot is falling asleep, going numb, and all those things. And one of the functions of meditation is to grow that space between when you identify the stimulant, or in this case, like the irritation or the frustration or the anger, growing that space between that and you're responding to it. And in that space, how we grow it is to observe it as like an outsider, like, you know what I mean? You become the observer. It takes practice, like I said, it's not always easy, but every second, every minute counts, right. And they compound as you do it more and more.
And the practical way that I explain this to people is the ability to be able to walk away from a situation.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes we find ourselves in a space where, whether it's our pride, it's our identity with respect, with honesty, things like that push us to the level of frustration that will lead us to die on this hill, right?
Yeah.
And later we'll look back at that hill and be like, why did I put all that energy and time into that situation, when if I would have stepped away for a moment and thought about it, then I could have understand that maybe it's not as important as I think it is. Whether it's because I'm not going to change that person's mind, maybe they can understand me better if I know how to communicate, but sometimes we have to be accepting, which can be difficult.
It is. It absolutely is. I would say that, again, moving from that wellness space, that self-acceptance, it's even speaking to your example of traffic. So, like I said, God bless you, because me and traffic, and that's how I know I'm growing, because I haven't had any traffic road rage incidences in quite a while. I don't know if this is wood, we're just gonna knock on it, okay? But I think that what helped me really make a big leap in that particular space was identifying the fact that this isn't personal. They don't know that I have a kid in my backseat. They don't know that I have responsibilities. They don't know that there are people that depend on me. They would have done this to anybody, as they are. They're speeding through traffic. They're putting us all at risk, even themselves. And so for me, that really helped take away some of the sting, which helps lessen my desire to respond. Because it's almost like they're not even talking to me. You know what I mean? Like, you're not even they're not talking to me. They're talking at me from their own vantage point, for sure.
I think that is such a good point, not to take everything personal. Because if you are arguing with a stranger, they don't know you, they don't know your life, they don't know that you got bills to pay, you got kids at home.
They don't even know your name.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes when they do know your name, they still don't know you well enough to speak to who you are. And their frustration doesn't have to rub off on you. I know that we've heard it said probably a million times before that misery loves company, but it's true. It's true. There are people who will find themselves in a space that's kind of downtrodden, that is, negative, and that's their own issue to deal with, right? But we don't have to find ourselves engaged in that just because that's the space that they're in.
Absolutely.
And it could be a moment. It could be, that they're dealing with some type of depression or anxiety or something like that keeps them in that space. But when we work on our individual issues, we can recognize that in that moment. Wait a minute, this is not about me.
Mine.
Like, this doesn't belong to me.
This is not mine to carry. I view it as like a weighted blanket. And nobody likes the blanket of frustration or the blanket of anger. And so if I can, even for a moment, give you my blanket to hold, my anger to hold, that gives me relief. It's just going to come back on, but at least I had that brief moment of relief. And so it's each individual's responsibility to decide, oh, no, thank you. I'm actually not going to hold that. And I'm going to go about my day in peace and happiness and joy.
Right. I think that's big. That's big. So there are some principles that are associated with emotional intelligence, and I think those are kind of important to touch on. So one of those principles is our ability to be able to accept constructive criticism and positive and negative feedback. So now we're talking about controlling our emotions, right? If I'm in a space where can't nobody tell me about me, because I'm right, I've never said that before. But if I'm in that space and someone is trying to offer me some information that might be helpful, and maybe they don't deliver it in the right way, right? People don't always deliver things in the right way. How do you think people can become more more able to accept constructive criticism and positive and negative feedback?
Oh wow, that's a great question. Probably one of my favorite things to speak about. I think that first and foremost, understanding that every piece of information that you gather is to benefit you, right? And that can come in one of two ways. The way that I describe it to my daughter, who is 11, I ask her, if someone steps on $100 bill and like tries to hand it to you, are you going to turn it away because they stepped on it? You better not. not in this economy, okay? Not in this economy. If someone crumples it up, or if you see $100 bill even in the trash, listen, in this economy, go ahead and just grab it out with some gloves. Pick it up with some gloves. Exactly. Everybody has hand sanitizer everywhere. So yeah, pick it up. And I view criticism the same way. And I think that, but that also comes from a deep sense of self-awareness. So I am personally, I like to believe that I'm very rooted in who I am as a person, which took many, many years to build and ground. And so when somebody is telling me something, I align it with, if it's constructive criticism that's, kind of with a negative tone, I factor in the source. Like, does this person know me well enough to really have a full picture to offer this advice? I compare it against, that person's level of expertise in the field that they're like, what they're discussing. And then I, cross-reference it with like, is this information going to be beneficial to me in the way that matters to me, right? So just random example, this is a completely hypothetical made up. If you as a, mental health professional, somebody who has much more experience than I do, offer me some feedback or constructive criticism in notes that I've taken, right? I'm gonna compare like, well, this person knows what she's talking about. She has no ill will towards me. She wants to see me thrive. And this is important to me. Her giving me this information will help me improve something that's valuable to me. So I'm going to accept it more openly. Even if you were having a bad day and you kind of like barked it at me, which she would never do, but she would never do that. Barked it at me or sent it in an email that was maybe curt, again, something she would never do. All of those other things, the fact that you are an expert, you want me to do well, and this is important to me, I would consider those things. And then on the flip side, because I think it's also very important to be able to accept positive feedback, which is something that people struggle with, I struggle with, I would then assess myself, right? Because for a lot of people, it's challenging to accept positive, feedback. And so I would assess myself, Tracy, is there factual evidence to back this up? Are there ulterior motives for this person offering you this feedback? And is there something within you that's stopping you from accepting it? So it just depends on the dynamic of the conversation, but that's generally how I assess any information coming my way. Consider the source and take good advice. That's what my dad taught me.
Ooh, Tracy talked about growing the gap. Her gap is, she got time, she got thought process time, right? And I think that's amazing, because one of the things that we do is we react so quickly. We're quick because sometimes things sound like disrespect. We have like this thing, it's like, wait a minute, what are you trying to say? But when we stop to think about it, sometimes maybe the messaging is off, right? Maybe the approach is off, but there may be something in there that we can learn about ourselves that makes us better. Now, it might not be to the benefit of that person who's giving you that feedback or critique, but maybe it's to the benefit of you, right? Because your actions and behaviors are really to benefit you. I love the fact that you said that every experience that you're having is there to benefit you. And if we start looking at things that way, we become more aware that there's a lesson in everything. So some of the things that I work in therapy with clients about is being able to recognize that life is a journey and all of our experiences matter. When you get to the point where you can say, whatever it was, I was standing in line at the grocery store today and I was just frustrated because I was standing there. The world is happening around me. I have a list of things that I need to do, and this feels like a waste of my time. If I can say in that moment that I learned something about myself, maybe I learned that
don't go to Walmart at noon on a Friday.
that could be it. That could be it, and that could change your life.
Don't say less.
Listen, maybe it's that I learned that that space feels like a time that is rushed or anxious for me, and I decide that from here on out I'm ordering my groceries. Just drop them off at the door so I don't have to deal with the line. Maybe I learned that I need to insert more patience into my life, right? Because these are things that you have to do. You got to eat, so you got to get the food from somewhere, and I'm telling you, you're trying to DoorDash every day. That bill
budget in this economy,
Tracy, is all about the economy. But when we start to learn these things about ourselves, we can use them as a process of just being more content and more comfortable in our journey. It is a journey, though. I think that one of the things that is also important to talk about, and it kind of ties into all of this. One of the principles of emotional intelligence is being able to stop and think before you speak and act. So there's this kind of, I don't know what you would call it, a fable, a story about the leaves and the words, right? So once you say something, it's out there, and you can apologize for it. You know, you in a moment. Now I've done this. I've done this. In a moment, say something that maybe if you would have communicated it a week earlier, it wouldn't have came out the way that it came out. But say something and immediately feel like, ooh,
that wasn't it.
That was rough.
Right.
And then recognize that it's out there now. So the person that you're talking to, whether it's your significant other or your child or your coworker or whoever it is, realizing that now that message, whether you meant it or not, they have internalized it in some way, right? And so when we start practicing the idea of stopping and thinking before we speak and act, it means that not only are we protecting ourselves from being perceived as something that maybe we're not, maybe in that moment we are frustrated, angry, whatever it is, but also protecting others in the relationships that we have that are important, because that means that they will see us as who we're trying to be and not who we were in a moment of frustration or anger.
Absolutely. And I would even say articulating that, right? Especially if you're engaged in a relationship or a dynamic that's valuable to you. Hey, I was a classroom teacher, and first week of school, everybody has bad days. They can't all be good days. All I ask is that you communicate. If you're having a rough day and you don't want to necessarily participate in class that day or whatever, let me know on the front end so I can navigate that throughout the classroom session, right? In dialogue with your partner, hey, I'm really frustrated right now. I think we should probably table this conversation.
Let's put a pin in it.
You know what I mean? Or can we revisit this later? And also, I think there's a quote that says, don't commit to a bad decision just because it took a long time making it, or you know what I mean? You don't have to continue down one road just because you already started walking that way. And I think that's really great, especially with kids. I do this with my daughter all the time. If I speak out of character or out of my own ideologies or whatever, I let her know, like, you know what, that was rude. That was rude of me. I shouldn't have said it that way. I apologize. This is what I meant to say. And for me, it's created a culture in our home of like, hey, I have more experience in this life game, but I am nobody's expert, and I'm going to make mistakes and say things out of turn. And we've been doing this 11 years, so she knows by now, like, yeah, it's okay to like, even she'll say, that was a little bit rude. Like, you know what I mean? That came out a lot more harsh than I anticipated. And then she gets to revisit it. And so I think, not only does it teach the people who we care about that, hey, I'm human, don't put me on a pedestal, but it also gives them permission to be human and make mistakes or, things like that.
And so my saying is, I'm sorry, but I don't have it today.
I got it.
I can't explain it to you, especially if I'm in a space of everything is irritating to me. And sometimes I'm human. Sometimes I get into that space where the sound of people's voices are bothersome. And so my way of trying not to be offensive or hurtful is saying, I'm sorry, I don't have it today. And my family understands
Mm-hmm.
that when I say I don't have it today, I really don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the pause that I need to not say something that maybe I'll regret later. I just don't have it right now.
And
I
that's
feel
fair.
like that's okay.
I feel like that's absolutely fair. I feel like because we've all, if there's anybody watching this that has never felt like they don't have it, please reach out to me personally, because I would like to know how you've done it, because I have never met anybody who every single day and every moment had the bandwidth for everything that life is throwing at us as adults.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like that's more than fair, and especially to be able to articulate it, I think that's more than fair, right? It's fair warning, fair,
So I think that this part of the conversation actually leads into the last principle that I want to talk about in emotional intelligence, and that is the courage to apologize.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we have been kind of indoctrinated with these thoughts that say you can't not be right, right? You have to be on top of everything all the time. You have to pretend like you're perfect. You have to strive for perfection. And I just continue to keep reminding people that you're human, and I haven't met somebody who's perfect, right? Like, I mean, I have bad hair days all the time. It's not my fault, but but my thing is, I want people to start thinking about the importance of being in that moment, like you said, being in. I'm sorry, that was rude. I didn't mean to say it that way. Because the more and more we do that, the more and more we start to recognize, before we have to get to the point of apologizing, that it's okay for me to stop right here.
Right.
When we talk about the courage to apologize, we talk about the balance between relationship and ego, right? So if I'm willing to say that I did something wrong, that I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt your feelings, I recognize that your feelings are hurt, that's not the way that I feel, I'm saying to that person, whoever it is, that my relationship with you is more important than my ego. That it's more important than my need to be right. Even though sometimes my need to be right is like really high, I want you to know that I care enough about you to put myself in a space of humility and say, I was wrong, and I apologize.
I would also say that perfection mindset is so pervasive in society, especially with social media nowadays. But when we shift from perfection to growth, it makes those conversations so much easier, because, perfection is exhausting. Nobody's perfect, obviously, but even pretend perfection is exhausting. Growth is so much easier, and it's way more fun, and it gives you so much more freedom. And essentially, you're getting better, right? So you're moving towards that perfection, but it's movement with freedom. It's open movement, in my opinion. So
I think it feels better.
1,000%.
It feels like you're becoming more in tune with the person that you're trying to be, and not more in tune with something that you've placed on this pedestal as what you need to be. So I think that all of these concepts when it comes to emotional intelligence are important, and I appreciate you so much for taking the time to talk with me about it and to provide some information to the people who will consume this. I think that one of the things that we need to continue to do is to have conversations about our mental well-being, the importance of communication, the importance of emotional intelligence. So please join us this Thursday for our Solutions of Change Monthly Mental Health Moment open group forum. In this group, we'll get together and talk more about emotional intelligence and some of these principles and how we use them to better ourselves, our relationships, our communities, and society as a whole. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Now that you've heard us talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and some important principles in being able to recognize, control, and effectively express our emotions, join us for our Solutions of Change Monthly Mental Health Moment group via Zoom this Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., where we'll continue the conversation about emotional intelligence.